Please can vouch for
There's-
this. Okay, well, we may have to just wing it.
Yeah.
Hey,
I'm here for it.
always a good opportunity to practice those skills. Yep. Yeah. Record.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'm Jeff Gadman, Chair of the Planning Commission. I'm going to call the November 12th, 2025 meeting of the Lacey Planning Commission to order. We have quorum here. Judy is out. Elliot is not here. He may show up late. Karian, would you please read our land acknowledgement tonight?
We, the city of Lacey, are on the ancestral land of the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek, including the Nisqually Indian tribe and Squaxin Island tribe. We acknowledge and remember those tribal people not recognized today who were absorbed or relocated into other tribes for survival. We recognize the ancestors and their descendants who are still here. We recognize and respect the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek as the traditional stewards of this land since time immemorial, and their role today in taking care of these lands in perpetuity. We recognize and have the responsibility to call attention to the histories of dispossession, forced removal, and abridged treaty rights that allowed our nation, state, and city to develop as they have today. We recommend that county members read the Medicine Creek Treaty, community members rather, read the Medicine Creek Treaty of 1854.
Thank you. And as I mention every once in a while, we do take this serious. This isn't something we're just doing by rote. So the next item is approval of the agenda. I would look for a motion or amendments.
So moved.
Second.
That's Kieran. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And then for the October 22nd minutes.
Move to approve the October 22nd minutes.
Spencer.
Second.
Robert. All right, it's been moved and seconded to approve the October 22 minutes. All those in favor? Okay, we do not have any members of the public in attendance. We do have one, but he is observing, so no public comment. Any commission member reports? We'll start with Tanya. Anything? Okay, anybody else?
I think it's amazing that we had almost 40% turnout for the election, and it's a nail biter. Every vote truly counts. I'm looking at some of the races that are just going back and forth. So hopefully we get everybody engaged in voting and being an active citizen.
I agree. Thank you. Any department report?
Yeah, I'll just do a quick one. So I know we had some members of our planning commission that weren't at the last meeting, so planning commission did make a recommendation on the comprehensive plan. And now that is sent to the council, and so I kind of wanted to fill you in a little bit on that process. So at this point, we're going to be briefing the council on November 25th on the planning commission's recommendation. There are some slight amendments that will been done by the time the planning commission has made the recommendation and the time that the council will be approving that. So we really we want to make sure that the city council is aware of what those things are. We're still within our 60-day comment window from the Department of Commerce as well. That kind of expires on December 1st, right around December 1st. So there's still some changes that will be made to our comprehensive plan up until right prior to adoption. So not only are we going to fill the planning commission in on kind of, the planning commission's recommendation, which they've seen most of, and I think last briefed them, I want to say at the end of August. So they're very familiar with what's in the document. Also provide them the information of what's changed since that point as well, and then update them on the latest that we have on our website that we're under development on. Hopefully, all that to be said, on December 16th would be the final ordinance adoption date for the comprehensive plan. So again, thank you all for your work on this essentially multi-year process at this point. It was a long time to get here, but we're definitely coming down to the end of things. And so it's an exciting time that we are moving forward with developing our work plan for the next year. So stay tuned for that. That's something that you all will see at the next meeting in December. So just a reminder, we're not gonna have a meeting in 2 weeks. That's the night before Thanksgiving. So when we're back in December, we'll go through that work plan as one of the items. That will prepare us for the joint meeting with the planning commission and the council. That will be held in early 2026. We're looking at probably like a late January, early February date, most likely to be on a Tuesday evening. So those are held on a council work session evening. So it'll be, we'll kind of trade a planning commission meeting for a council meeting for that week. So stay tuned, more to come on that. But just kind of a little bit of a thank you for the work we've done all this year, but then also get prepared because we're gonna start moving towards implementation. And we have still got a lot of stuff in front of us moving forward. So yeah, I
Great.
think
Does
that's about
anybody
it.
have any questions for Ryan on any of that? Okay, so I'm assuming the 25th is a work session.
Correct, yes.
And is there any advantage to me being in attendance?
Would you like to be there?
I think so.
I think in previous years, especially with
Yeah.
comprehensive plan recommendations, we've had the planning commission chair be there.
Yes.
Okay.
I would like to,
Okay,
yes.
I absolutely would love to have you there, Jeff. So
Okay,
yeah, you sit right here at the table with us and yeah.
be like old times.
Yeah. Look out, they might get called back.
Thank you. Okay, we have no public hearing, so we're on to new business, and Jennifer is gonna give us a briefing on co-living housing draft update. And at this time, this is in preparation for a public hearing on the 10th of December. So Jennifer.
Well, first of all, good evening, everyone. It's really nice to see you as always. Tanya as well, hello. Always appreciate coming here, such a thoughtful commission. And so this is part of the fun of, getting to dive into some of these topics is getting to kind of collaborate with each of you here. So tonight I'm gonna apologize in advance. I have a lot for you this evening. A couple of new things with the co-living and then a couple of other housing initiatives that maybe won't sound completely new, but that we haven't covered a lot. And or we haven't had a review for a while, such is the case with middle housing. So this evening, the order of business is, I'm gonna cover these 4 things you see on the screen here. So we're gonna start off with co-living. That's gonna be our new item. And then we'll move on through middle housing updates, some updates with accessory dwelling units. And then finally, we will end up talking about lot subdivisions. That may be the one you may have heard, you may have not heard about this one yet. So as we continue on with, none of us here are strangers to the pressures in housing, and none of us are strangers to the amount of housing legislation that has come down in the last, 5 years, 2 years, specifically the last 2 years. So there's a lot going on, and a lot for us to consider, whether it's through mandates or whether it's through policy choice. So with that said, again, I forgot my apology. Do
Do you have the clicker? I just want
I
to make sure. Oh, you got
do,
it.
yes, I do. Thanks for reminding me too, because I did want to apologize too. There's a lot of words tonight on the screen. Sometimes it just feels unavoidable. It is a lot more fun to present with lots of pictures and things like that. Tonight, we're just gonna see a lot of words, but we'll try to make it discussionary and just kind of talk through what we're seeing. So with that said, let's see how this works. Okay, so to start off, what exactly is co-living housing? What are we talking about when we say that? So the findings of the state have identified co-living housing as a residential development made up of independently rented lockable sleeping units that provide space for living and sleeping, while residents share kitchen facilities with other sleeping units in the building. So it's a little bit vague in areas, and you'll notice that it does remain silent on a few things, particularly bathrooms. So we will be coming to that soon here for a discussion. So the concept of co-living is not necessarily new. This type of shared housing that has been in existence in the United States for probably likely over a century. Other common names you may have heard, this style of housing or concept of housing would be things like congregate living facilities, rooming houses, maybe something like a modernized boarding house, et cetera. But the state, what they're doing here, I sort of consider a rebranding or a standardization of this type of housing. They've repackaged this to be called co-living housing. So that's what you're going to probably broadly see across other jurisdictions who are also implementing this into their code. And then they have mandated that this form of housing, this co-living housing, be allowed in every community where multifamily housing is permitted, and more specifically where 6 or more units of multifamily housing are permitted. So that's kind of the trigger where co-living housing would need to be allowed within our jurisdiction. And so overall, the main idea there again is to provide smaller, more efficient spaces that are affordable by design. So that's really going to be key here. They're affordable in theory, by design. These are not housing units that are dependent on any type of subsidy. Okay, so not for, well, I don't know about the development side necessarily. I'm not sure what the options are there, but for residents, these would not be supported by housing subsidies. So truly, the state is looking to provide another type of housing that should be accessible to some groups that are harder to reach, such as those in lower income brackets. So we'll look a little bit more at that as we go as well. And then lastly, the state also finds that co-living housing might be well suited for, well, I guess we just covered a bit about that, low income earners. Could possibly be a model for supportive and recovery housing, possibly supporting those coming out of homelessness or another type of shelter, facility. And then maybe students. In my mind, I traditionally think about students, right, or young people. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the actual statutory requirements say. And there's quite a few. So I've got 2 slides here, and I'm going to just kind of read these as we go along. So co-living housing, we established already, will be triggered when in a zone that allows multifamily units, 6 or more. Co-living housing must apply the same dimensional and review standards as multifamily. So that's also really important in our conversation, is that this will by and large be regulated similar to multifamily. And also really important, we see this with middle housing as well, but the language is specific about it can't be regulated more strictly than we would for multifamily. So just keep that in mind as well. As far as the sleeping units go, how the RCW or the legislation looks at this when we're talking about density is that each sleeping unit within a co-living development, so the development, let's parse that out for a second. The development is comprised of the sleeping units, the co-living sleeping units. So each of those units can only count as a quarter of a dwelling unit. So that's our number for density. Sewer connection fees can only be half of those of a dwelling unit. Off-street parking maximum requirements, we cannot require any more than 0.25 of a parking space for every 4 units. So every 4 units in a co-living development would yield 1 parking space.
I have a question.
Yes.
So there seems to be a disconnect between count sleeping units and sewer connection fees. How can a sleeping unit count as a quarter of a dwelling unit, but the connection fees be half?
That is a really good question for Ryan Andrews. Because I'm not sure. I can tell you that with the dwelling unit, so we have this conversation, we have been collaborating, of course, with Public Works. I do think Ryan's gonna be able to explain the math on this a little bit better. I'm just gonna stop there and let you take it over so that I
Well,
don't misspeak.
I don't know if I'm gonna be able, so where this comes from is from the RCW, which originally came from a bill, right? So the legislature put forward that these were the standards. So, I'm not exactly sure why there's a discrepancy. One says a quarter and then, for the sewer, it says a half. But I'll use, so what we do for just FYI for sewer is that everything's broken down into what's called an equivalent residential unit, also known as an ERU. And an ERU is one single family dwelling. And so currently for multifamily, so anything that is a studio apartment or above, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, they pay 0.7 of an ERU. And so for our sleeping units in co-housing, those would go down to 0.5. So it makes sense. And really the idea is, and Jennifer will get this into a second, when we're looking at actually drafting city regulations for this, we want this to not just be a way to be able to be kind of a loophole into a studio unit, that these also, and we're gonna get into it, where these have shared bathroom facilities down the hall, they have shared kitchens and those kinds of things that give them essentially some, there's some calculation built in so that they actually get some credit to actually go down to that 1/2 of an ERU per unit. So the good thing is that based on that sliding scale, so if you start at the single family at 1 ERU, you go down to a single multifamily at 0.7, you go down to these co-housing sleeping units at half, it makes sense. Why is it different between that and a quarter? Like when you're talking about here, quarter of a dwelling unit, quarter of a parking space, I'm not sure. So I can't do the math on that to get you there. Well, all I can tell you is that from a sewer equivalent unit, that half makes sense for this calculation.
So it's a product of the wisdom on the.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
That's very well said, yes, all of the wisdoms. All right, well, let's just continue on with a few more of the high level statutory requirements. Co-living cannot require other uses in a co-living building. We may circle back to that in our conversation. Co-living must not exclude co-living housing, or excuse me, must not exclude co-living housing from participating in affordable housing incentive programs. So any affordable housing incentive programs that the city of Lacey participates in, we need to make sure that co-living has that same equal opportunity to participate in those as well. And then we talked about this already, again, just so important, a city may not require through development regulations any standards for co-living housing that are more restrictive than those that are required for other types of multifamily residential uses in the same zone. And then I'm going to briefly touch upon implementation due date, which is technically December the 31st. We are going to aim to wrap this up a little bit beyond that, probably by the first part of, probably in January 2026 is what feels like a comfortable target for us at this point. There are no punitive consequences, for not meeting that hard and fast date. However, as with most legislation, the RCW would prevail if we did get a proposal come in through the door prior to our own adoption of our code. So let's move on through. So let's talk about what staff has been doing. So we do some things at our desks and in our cubicles. And so as far as co-living goes, like I said before, we've been doing quite a bit of collaboration. So we've been having very consistent meetings with our current planners. And the current planners are critical, of course, to how we write and how we plan to implement code. And so their voice is extremely important to this work. So we've been meeting very regularly with current planning, as well as doing some collaborating with Public Works as well, because we want to make sure that we're all going to be in alignment with zoning and infrastructure as we implement this and other housing initiatives as we move forward. Staff has also prepared some preliminary code language that should have been included in your packet for this evening. So there should be 3 attachments there with this item. You should have the proposed new chapter for co-living housing, and then you should have the respective parking standard update on that, as well as some definitions that we needed to come up with, you know, to make this co-living chapter happen. And then we've also identified some key areas that we're gonna bring to you tonight, which will be kind of the meat and potatoes of our discussion. So those two things, and we may have more, and that's great, that's why we're here. But the two things that really come to mind for us right now are shared facilities versus private facilities. So if you can picture like a kitchenette, it's not a full kitchen, but maybe a kitchenette. Something that you might see in maybe like a hotel or maybe even a studio apartment. And then we'll talk about that, and then we'd like to have a discussion as well about bicycle parking standards. So that is coming very quickly. So let's go ahead and move on. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that you will see in your draft proposed chapter. These are policy choices. So I'm going to say again and just reiterate, all of this is up for discussion. So please don't feel shy about that or asking questions. What has felt comfortable to staff as we have been working on this is to set a sort of a cap on sleeping unit size. That made the most sense to us. It's also what we are seeing other jurisdictions do. And so a number that felt fairly comfortable was 250 square feet as a maximum unit size. And so there's also some language in the RCW that talks about making sure that we allow at least the minimum standard of the building code. I think the current building code iteration that we would be following says 70 square feet. So you could anticipate somewhere between 70 square feet and 250 square feet for the actual living/sleeping units in a co-living development. The other recommendation that staff has in this draft is that these units would have shared facilities only. So shared kitchens, shared bathrooms, but no private bathrooms and no smaller kitchenette units within the facilities. And we'll talk about that as we go on. So with that, when we take a look at, well, what would be a good ratio, right? I mean, you don't want 50 co-living units with one kitchen. So we started to look at what would be a comfortable ratio for sleeping units to kitchen. And so we landed right now on 6 units. So 6 units per one. And then what we need to do there as well is call this a standard kitchen. And so you will see in the next bullet point there that we have created a definition or a proposed definition for a standard kitchen, because that wasn't found elsewhere in our current LMC. So a shared facilities only is our current proposal. And then that ratio of 1 to 6 sleeping units. Now, what happens if a developer proposes a total of 8 sleeping units? Does that warrant 2 kitchens? Does that trigger 2 kitchens? So the answer to that is no. So we would use this kitchen rounding approach to address fractional kitchens, right? So let's say a developer proposes 7 or 8 units. We're gonna kind of ignore that. Ignore may not be the kindest word, but we're gonna ignore that a bit. And then 9, 10, 11, 12, that's gonna trigger that second kitchen, and then so on, right? So fractional kitchens, that's how we'd like to deal with that, is through kind of this kitchen rounding process. Let's see. So again, definitions, you will see in your packet a definition that describes the co-living housing itself, the sleeping unit, the standard kitchen, and then what do we mean when we're talking about shared facilities? So you'll see those as well.
Do we want to pause here and ask the planning commission to see if they got any questions or
Yeah, for
raise any
sure.
concerns about the
Absolutely.
standards? Why don't you go back one slide?
Absolutely. Okay, this one. Oh, sorry, wrong one. This one.
There you go.
There we go.
Okay, Tanya, any questions? Anybody else?
I have a question.
So we'll just go clockwise.
Sure.
So you said rounded kitchens, fractional or kitchens.
Fractional kitchen.
Does that mean that you're
Kitchen
gonna ask them to, the builder to include a little bit more of the kitchen? It's still one standard kitchen, or what does that mean?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So I think the way we have it now is it would just hold at the one standard kitchen.
Okay,
you know, I mean, these are things we could take into consideration, whether there would be increased standards or not. But I think that was a clean way of, you know, trying to get that expressed in code.
And these sleeping units represent one person?
Also a really good question. So this is also a place where the RCWs are silent on this. We also have some other legislation. I won't get into the weeds too much, but that have to do with regulating occupancy.
Okay.
So it's a kind of a sensitive area. It's not really within our purview necessarily. There are building code provisions that, you know, establish number of facilities and amenities per occupancy, but that's sort of where that would fall
Okay.
relevant to co-living. However, in discussions, it has come up that we could fairly easily make an assumption that each sleeping unit could probably have 2 people in it.
Yeah.
And so we started to then even use that number. So when we say the ratio of 1 to 6, that may not be 6 persons. It could be 12 persons.
And I imagine that people are probably going to end up having to, even if they're required to just be one person, just thinking
For
about what you-
affordability, absolutely.
Curious, are you doing required shared facilities because it makes the housing more affordable? Or what's the thought?
Yeah, so, and we're gonna get there in a little more detail
okay.
as well, but this is as good a time as any to talk about that as well. I think that you've actually made one of our points, yes, is that the sort of the true intention of the legislation is to provide this other type of housing. If we start, let's say these have kitchenettes and they have private bathrooms, it starts to make it very hard to distinguish between what is co-living and what would be a studio apartment. And so it starts to make regulating these a little bit more tricky. So part of this is for clarity. Ryan, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, that was really good. And
Okay.
it's really a policy decision and something we want to
Sure.
ask the planning commission, like, you know, do you feel a different, you know, like we should go a different direction on this? Because, you know, I'll just also add that, you know, we're not really seeing any demand for these at all. We're not seeing developers come to us and wanting to do this as an option. Really, it's like we have to allow it because the state law says we have to. But the market, especially in Lacey, isn't quite there yet. And I can see, especially with some of the things like parking restrictions and other things, it's really going to limit this. You know, maybe I'm thinking like, okay, in a student situation where you're right in here close to St. Martin's, maybe that's something that, you know, might be, you know, marketable. But we just don't see that there's, you know, a huge market for these. And so thinking back, okay, who could potentially be a tenant there? Again, getting back to maybe the students. Well, does every student need a kitchen or, you know, or would they be okay with like having a shared facility, almost kind of like a dorm situation with this is kind of starting to mirror with a kitchen down the hall, with a bathroom down the hall. So we don't see that having these things like shared kitchens and bathrooms would be something that would be a deal killer. I think in fact, it might be something that would be preferred, you know, if we were to look at locating one of these in Lacey, that might be a developer's preferred option. If not, there's always, you can always do a studio apartment and there's nothing against that. So it just gives you another option.
I think it's great, and I think that the number is really generous. Thinking about the times I lived in a dorm, which this sounds like college, when I was in the Air Force, we had a lot more people to a kitchen, to a bathroom, or, you know, to a multi-stall bathroom. And it was perfectly comfortable. So I think people are really looking for affordable options, right? Because you look at a studio apartment, it's still not affordable for most
Right,
people.
right.
So I think this is great. This is
So,
really interesting.
and to your point, Jennifer, and then Carrie, and I know you're next, I just wanted to piggyback on that to your original question, you know, I think it is reasonable to say that by limiting to shared facilities, the development costs should be substantially lower, right? Those are significant costs within a development. Yeah, so, and then Carrie.
Yeah, I like the idea, having lived with 7 people in like a Victorian flat before with 1 bathroom and a shared kitchen. The senior tenants would sometimes get a deal break and then the rest of the people would end up paying more and it would go down as progressive roommates come in. So having like a set amount where it's not kind of that you pay more because you're the last tenant in is it seems like a way to build equity and make it inclusive for people at lower or the need to have affordable housing at that rate. But I was really concerned because I'm thinking about like multifamily with 6 units. So I think I live in a neighborhood like that, which is an older neighborhood. And if somebody was to build one of these here with only one parking spot for potentially 6 people, potentially 6 cars in this neighborhood, and in my neighborhood, it's already a problem with duplexes coming in. And the excess cars on, which make it down to like a 1-lane street, which is really challenging. So that coupled with when I was reading on in the documentation saying that developers for getting the minimum could get a 5% discount. And then if they go below minimum, so could they even go below providing a quarter of a spot per person to get a 10% reduction in impact fees? It seems like the minimums in our neighborhoods, it would have to really be that there was in conjunction with, there's a shared lot over here where cars can go with specific and explicit language, you know, to protect those smaller communities about like no street parking or something like that. Because I was even talking to one of the Lacey PD people saying that it is a problem in other communities. It's that they're getting a lot of complaints about issues of parking. So that's my biggest concern.
So I can tell you from my experience, and you know, I've been in land use for a very, very long time. Developers are not gonna propose a project or want to do a project where they don't have parking for their projected occupancy. And so the regulation, the way it's written, actually makes sense to me. Because then it puts it on the developer. You know, if you're gonna come in and want 6 units in this building, it's on you to make sure that there's some place for them to go, right? And they won't do it otherwise.
You know, the problem is on that is that like for developers that only want to provide only the minimum, so you have a quarter space per unit, you have 6 units, that's a space and a half for 6 units, is that it pushes the rest of the parking out to the on-street and then those kinds of things. I think that's what Kieran, part of your concerns are. You're in an area where you've got, you know, a shoulder essentially to park on and maybe in front of somebody else's house, right? And so that puts the impacts on the surrounding neighbors. So and I'll just say that this is one of those things that we don't really have a say in.
Right.
So the state is saying that you must allow these types of facilities and you cannot require more than a quarter parking space per unit. So understand that we're a little bit stuck, I guess, when it comes to that, because a developer can always provide more, but we
Yes.
can't require more.
Right,
Yeah.
and I wanna say too, there's a very, very strong sentiment in the Capitol building to completely eliminate parking regulations. Minimum parking requirements, period.
And it's unfortunate because it's being pushed on. I know I sympathize with you and where you're at. It's being pushed on to these other neighbors, you know, that have to
Right.
provide, you know, they're fighting for the same parking spots on street,
Exactly.
you know, that somebody that maybe has lived next door to one of these for potentially, you know, decades. And it's unfortunate because, and Jeff, you're exactly right, is that the state's coming down and saying, well, we hear you, but you know, we want housing wherever, however we can, and by removing parking as a barrier, that's one way that they feel like they can, you know, kind of, you know.
Right, I'm gonna
get
let
more-
Spencer
more
go.
options.
We'll let everybody speak and then I'll come back.
Okay.
In an earlier slide, did it say that it can't have a mixed use, that it can only be for residential?
It did say that. Do we want to go back there now, Ryan?
Yeah, you can just go back a slider. I think it maybe one
I
slide.
think it was, let's see.
Correction.
Did I go the wrong?
Require.
Yeah, at the
Cannot
top bullet
require
there.
other uses in a co-living building.
Okay, thank you. That's what I didn't clear.
So we can require it on the site. That's that's our determination, is that this really just says specifically with the building. But like, for example, if you've got a situation where you require X amount of commercial to be built on the same site as multifamily, we can still require that. But what we can't require is that there be other uses within that individual co-living building. So just keep that in mind. I think what this is getting at is we can't just say, well, you gotta have commercial as part of your co-living building, that we, but if it's elsewhere on the site, there's nothing in the RCW that speaks to the rest of the site. It's only specific to the building. And so it's our interpretation that those other things around it can still be required.
Robert?
Can you call one forward? Sorry, I think it's the amount. Oh no, two forward. There we go. Is the 70 feet square minimum per building code, is that just overall for all housing, or is that specifically for co-living? Where's the 70 kind of coming in? Cause 250, like when you think about sizing,
Right.
the average hostel is like 180 to 250. The average hotel is 250 to 400. So like 70 is quite small.
Is quite
10 by
small.
7
Yeah.
dorm room.
It's, yeah, it's, I mean, yeah, it's smaller than some of the dorm rooms. So just where does that come in? Is that the legislature that's saying the 70 feet, or is that us, our municipal code, or?
That's, I think, in the International Building Code. We
It's the
can,
international.
okay, we can double check on that, but that is basically the minimum area you need for a bedroom.
Okay.
Per the building code, so it's
To fit
essentially.
a bed in a room,
Yeah,
perfect.
exactly.
Which again, I know that goes back to like, obviously that's gonna be a harder sell for people, so and I think that's the hardest part about a lot of these things that are given to us and not really up for debate, is just because it's an option doesn't mean it's an option that people are going to take up on,
That
right?
have to
Like
take,
that-
exactly.
Right, it's just we have to, and then
Yeah.
the other question is just some of the examples that you gave are things that already exist in our community, and so would they be retrofitted to like co-living in the sense of like, right, we have dorms in the city of Lacey, and we have like recovery houses that have a many to one kind of ratio of like 6 people living in a house in separate lockable rooms
Yeah.
with it, right? So is that,
I mean, that's a really interesting question, quite frankly, and I'm not sure that I've given that a lot of
cause
thought.
all of a sudden I
Yeah.
want 0.5 instead of 0.7 or whatever the case may be, right? Like it just makes me question what process or what levers we have in place for something
So
like that.
essentially, when this would apply would be for anything that's
New,
new or a
okay.
conversion. So
Sure.
it would, in, a dorm situation like on St. Martin's has its own master plan that's been adopted that says this is where the dorms are gonna go and these are how many buildings. So that's a little bit of a unique situation. I think if this was to happen, these things were to be built, they would be somewhere else on private property. They're gonna be in a multifamily kind of configuration, so it's not gonna be conversion of an existing single family home per se. It's gonna be more of a stick built from the ground up kind of thing. So, and there are other provisions, we could have probably a several hour session on all the provisions of state law that allow for various different types of housing for things like, drug and alcohol recovery and, exit facilities when you get out of prison and, there's all kinds of different residential opportunities from that standpoint. We're really just very narrowly here talking about this one specific example.
And with regards to the 70 square feet, I'll tell you, the developers know when they go into an area what is marketable.
Right.
They're not gonna build something they can't sell.
Yeah, and to your point too, Jeff, and this is, I'd like to say it's kind of an assumption, but it's also feedback that we hear from our development community. Developers have a lot of really good things to say about working with Lacey. And my best guess is that they are very much keyed into the Lacey flavor or, however you want to look at that. They're keyed into what our community desires, what our community needs. So hopefully, they would be sensitive to making sure that parking was provided. A lot of times, we see these things across legislation, whether housing or something else. They're tested in cities, right? Large cities, places that are much more walkable, places that aren't auto-centric. And so it does make it a little trickier for jurisdictions like Lacey to find a clear path to implementing these.
The last thing a developer wants is to be in a situation with their lender where they've developed something that they're not getting any money out of.
Right.
Kieran?
I thought I had seen Elliot's hand raised on the screen. I guess
Is
Oh,
Elliot even here?
that was so weird. Maybe it was.
How do I get to
You go down to the bottom and then look at attendees. So like down in it should pop up a little. We may not be able to do it with sharing screen.
Yeah.
Well, Elliot, if you're here, and if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll definitely bring you in. Oh, there you go.
There you go.
Good.
So can we hear him?
Hit stop share.
Might mean
Oh,
he needs to be a
Promoted
panelist,
to
yeah.
panelist. There we go.
There we go.
Now he has to accept it.
Oh, okay.
All right, unmute yourself, Elliot.
I'm alive.
Hi.
Hi, guys.
You want me to go back to share?
I'm sorry about that. My question was, we're not talking about college dorms. We're not talking about military, cohabitating. I grew up in San Francisco, right above Haight-Ashbury, in a commune, a hippie commune. And, you're slamming a bunch of families into these small bedrooms, 6 or so, all sharing a kitchen, with the food. Who's my food? Where's your food? Blah, blah, blah. Hey, this is my time to be able to do things. Do we really want this sort of thing in our city? Because all we're doing is creating a cauldron of anger, frustration, and fights and cross-generational craziness. So
We
my
have a
personal
choice.
feeling is this is not a good idea, and you're talking about can't look at parking, you can't look at and the developers are going to look at this and go, well, gosh, you have potentially a huge fire hazard.
So we don't have a choice, Elliot. You missed the first part of the presentation.
I realize
Which is
that.
being
I know
thrown
the
at
state
us by the
legislature,
state.
but that's not the first crazy thing that's come down the road from them. And we should really be looking at ways to fight the craziness, because every 4 years, it's either more crazy or it's some sanity coming in.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Elliot, I appreciate you weighing in on this. I think, you clearly make a really good point. As Jeff was saying, unfortunately, there are mandates here. We do have some policy choice, and we're gonna dig into that here in just a bit. One thing that your comment kind of made me think about just a little bit is kind of the other side of that coin, or maybe it's a different coin altogether. But, when you talk about frustrating situations, right now, we're in a place where people are very frustrated. They cannot find any place to live that is affordable to their pocketbook. And so that argument is happening now. And so, really appreciate your comments about something that could happen with, the co-living. We're not there yet, and as Ryan pointed out, we don't have developers knocking down the door right now to build these units. So, I think it's something to really keep in mind. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, this is a good conversation. I do want to move on. It's
Yep.
6:45. And we
All
do
right.
have another agenda item to get to tonight, so.
Okay, all right. So let's quickly. Thanks, Catherine. Perfect. Okay, so this is just a continuation of the conversation. We're kind of already in, so just looking at some of those pros and cons, this is to the shared facilities. So some possible pros in this list this is not, an exhaustive list, clearly, but some pros. Again, we talked about clear distinction from studio apartments. That helps us with implementing code clearly and consistently. And it encourages the true essence of affordability for this type of unit. It also may encourage or promote a sense of community for folks that, are looking for this type of a living situation. And then less infrastructure needs, therefore, assumed less cost and less cost passed on to the end user, to the renter. And then cons, we've talked about a lot of those, but reduced market appeal, right? Reluctance to rent if you don't have a private bathroom. There may be privacy, safety, accessibility, and quality of life concerns, where quality of life is perceived as lower. But again, and to Robert's point, you know, just because we allow it as a pathway doesn't mean that it's right for everybody, nor does it mean it has to be chosen by everybody. So keep in mind, we're talking about just adding another option to our repertoire of housing options. And then let's move on. So here we are to kind of that meat and potatoes I was talking about. And we've already had some great discussion, so certainly we can add some more here. I think what we really wanted to talk about with you today is, should co-living units be allowed to include these private bathrooms or private kitchenettes inside the sleeping units? Or private bathrooms only inside a sleeping unit, or maybe we stick with what aligns with our draft code with the shared facilities only, and we've shared some reasons around why we have proposed that initially. So I just kind of wanted to open that up a little bit for discussion. We've talked about a few pros, we've talked about a few cons. So this is your chance if there's anything else you'd like to be considered.
I'm gonna start with Robert. Everybody will get a voice.
I do have some just safety concerns from not having a private bathroom, but I think that it could be remedied with lockable, you know, individual stalls or something along those lines where it's a many to one ratio. So there's 6 bedrooms and 3 bathroom units that have built-in showers that have a locking door that people can have their own like space or something along those lines. I just think that having a community space without any regulation, just without anyone resources, right, without implementing that you also have to have X, Y, and Z type of resources for conflict mediation. Like I go back to my higher education days and just like just shoving 6 people in a community space without anyone to lead a discussion on how to share a space. The way that can be avoided is having some level of privacy, right, and being able to lock that door from a safety and security standpoint. So if we were not to add one in the private rooms, I would say we'd need to focus on how to make those communal spaces safe and secure for individuals.
Excellent point, excellent
I
point.
would agree with that. And also, I think we should allow all of the options that we see on the screen, because that will provide developers with all of the tools necessary to meet the market demands for those units. And to his point, similar to all the co-living situations I've ever been in, you've had a shared living space with usually a satellite style of little apartments, rooms around it with 1, 2, maybe 3 separate private bathrooms, quite small, but they did have a lock on the door and they were individual units with a toilet and a shower. And usually it was a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 people per 1 restroom provided. And I always thought that those were a good option. And so something maybe along those same lines with those ratios would make sense and alleviate some of those issues. Cause yes, I mean, from an athletic standpoint and several other programs, large group showers, large bathrooms, open bathrooms like that were a lot of shenanigans and not in a good way.
Not comfortable.
No.
Period.
I'm thinking back again to when I was living in that Victorian flat and we had 7 bedrooms with 7 tenants and one that was like a sink and the bathtub and shower, and then another room that was a toilet and a little sink. So for 7 people in 7 rooms to share those spaces, but again, we did have a community and we had interviews and then we would invite someone to come live with us. And this is a little bit different, like you were saying, it's not that the group is deciding to bring someone on, it's just anybody can rent that space and become part of the group. And at that point, it does seem like, especially having a 16-year-old daughter with 1 bathroom in my home, that having my own toilet and sink so I can at least get ready for work in the morning, like a half bath might be a nice consideration for something like this. And I didn't know that, I hadn't heard of housing where there's like a full restroom for every two rooms, but it seems like having some flexibility in that space so that people could live there but also get to work would be beneficial, so.
Okay, Jennifer?
Yeah, so my thought is at minimum, a sink in a room would change the quality of life so much. Like if I'm thinking like from somebody who would want to rent versus not, hesitate, blah, blah, blah. If it had a sink, that would change a lot for me. I don't know how much that changes affordability though. So I don't know what that balance is. Yeah, obviously, I think half bath would be the most desirable. But if we're trying to make it, so it can be affordable housing, I don't know where that line is. But I will just throw in, having a sink would maybe assuage a lot of those interaction stressors, both in the kitchen and the bathroom, and a lot of reasons why that would be.
Certainly, certainly.
Okay, I'm gonna go to Elliot first and then Tanya.
So are we talking about one person, one room, or are we talking about a couple with children? And so you got little children sharing bathrooms with grown men, and what are we talking about here?
Well,
It could be all of the above.
yeah, so we talked a bit about, the city is limited, our purview is limited on actually regulating who and or the number of persons that occupy a room or a dwelling. So I don't know what a great answer is for Elliot's concern on that one, other than to say it's reasonable to bring that up, and I think that, it's relevant in this conversation.
So, we're talking about people that, you know, it's not like college dorms, it's not like our old days in the military. It's not, but we're talking about that we should require private bathrooms and kitchenettes in every sleeping unit. We have at least that in hospital rooms, right? But, again, do we really want that police to have to be there 12 times a day? Or have a report of a child being molested? So, you start packing people into those kinds of situations and you start getting all kinds of bad results.
So we're all bringing up really good points, and I thank you guys for all that, and this is all going to help drive the staff moving forward for revisions to this idea. Tanya?
Yeah, I like Jennifer's idea about maybe having some sort of sink in the unit. I know for me, I would prefer a private bathroom over a kitchenette. I wouldn't mind sharing a kitchen with people, but when it comes to a bathroom, that's when I think people would want more of privacy. Um, and it's just trying to figure out how to keep it affordable if you're giving everyone their own bathroom, or could we make it that it has to be one bathroom per every 3 units or something like that?
I mean, we have all kinds of different options. I think one thing that would help us as staff is to kind of get, and it doesn't need to be your final answer, but we do need to move this forward to to a public hearing at the next planning commission meeting. And so what I'm hearing and what we can put into the draft is, it sounds like potentially kitchen down the hall, but for bathrooms, probably at least, what we could do is we could put in half bath.
Yes.
I mean, at this point, I think that would be, and then security for shared facilities otherwise. I think that's kind of the main things that I'm hearing.
Yeah.
And put that out at least as our public hearing draft, get comments. I don't particularly think we're gonna get much feedback, but if we do, we can, we can change that, but we can change it up until your recommendation. So I think we've got some good feedback. We can roll with the like half bath in each room. And then for each of the common facilities, which I would say also include the kitchen in this, is that there needs to be secure and locked facilities. And that could be food, that could be your own kitchen equipment, that could be a shower, that could be a toilet stall, whatever. But that there needs to be, some level of appropriate, security provided for those common facilities. And I can work with you, Jennifer, to kind of maybe come up with some
Yeah.
general language
Yeah,
that
I
might
think
help with that.
you've encapsulated what I've heard here,
Okay.
so
Yeah, I
that's
think so
good.
as well. So yes, thanks to everybody. Anything else on this one, or are we ready to move on to the bicycle? Okay, excellent. So, The other part of the discussion we wanted to have with you, of course, is around the bicycle, oh, I'm sorry. It would be helpful, I suppose. It would be helpful if you guys got to see it too. I'm sorry. Okay, so to this point, we've established that co-living regulations can't be more restrictive than those of multifamily within a respective zone. So currently, Lacey bicycle standards correlate with the number of parking stalls for a project. So the standards for multifamily for a studio unit project, okay, only require one bicycle space per 10 parking spaces. Okay, so 10 parking spaces triggers the one bicycle space for a studio unit. That number moves up, if you have a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, et cetera. So at this rate, and if we use a simple scenario, this one here, just picking a nice even number of 40, this could mean that a co-living proposal that had 40 sleeping units at our current standards for multifamily parking / bicycle standards. And then considering the ratio that the state gives us of 0.25 parking space per one sleeping unit. Okay, I know this gets a little wonky. At any rate, a proposal with 40 sleeping units for a co-living development wouldn't even trigger any bicycle parking. Okay, because it wouldn't get to, it would yield 4 parking spaces. And if we go back and we look and we see, oh, bicycle spaces aren't triggered until you've reached 10 parking spaces. So 10 parking spaces equals 1 required biking.
Sweet, 100-to-1 ratio.
So yeah, it's fairly silly, considering, the potential demographic that we might be trying to target or reach with this type of a housing model,
Usually
right? So
transit-dependent individuals.
exactly. So when we are, assuming folks that are less auto dependent and probably more prone to alternative modes of transportation, such as a bicycle. And so then the next consideration in that sort of package, if you will, of talking about bicycle standards would be coming back to things I've heard here this evening, security, right? So what would we want this to look like in relationship to co-housing? I'm gonna back up and throw you another curveball really quick, which is just that we have to come back and remember that we can't make the standards any more strict than what we have for multifamily. Currently, this needs to follow what we have in place for multifamily. So in order for us to do something different here, we would really need to do kind of an overhaul to our multifamily. So one proposal, or maybe our initial proposal, is that we could pause on this for a bit of time. And the reason we throw that out there as a recommendation or a suggestion is that among housing legislation, there's a whole slew of parking legislation that is coming down the pipe already here. So we know in 2026 and probably 2027, we've got a lot to do with updating parking across the board. So there again, with consistency, with staff time, other things, Ryan or Jeff, you may think about that I'm not thinking about. One proposal to get us to compliance. So remember, we want to reach compliance probably sooner than later, but we could reach compliance and do nothing right now with bicycle standards. Bicycle standards are not even mentioned in the legislation. It's completely silent on that. So we can still reach compliance and pause, have a larger discussion about this, and roll that into future updates.
So because the compliance deadline is the end of the year and we're not gonna meet that compliance deadline. And you just opened up a whole can of worms for this discussion. We cannot make this any more restrictive than our multifamily regulations. So my recommendation, and I'm looking for concurrence on this, is we pause this the way Jennifer recommended and come back and revisit the parking standards for bicycles along with the multifamily at some point in 2026.
Jeff?
Can I get,
I was gonna ask, can I ask two clarifying questions before we do that?
certainly,
One, I'm looking at this and it says in the required bicycle parking spots, it says 2 minimum per building. So I was curious about that. And the second thing is, what is a bicycle parking spot? Is that like a sheltered thing that you lock, or is it just like a metal hook that you can attach a bicycle to?
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
So I agree with Jeff. I think, Karen, you're right. I think we would probably at least require like a minimum of 2 per building. So it wouldn't be exactly 0, but it's gonna be 2 stalls. And what 2 bicycle parking stalls could be is like, if you've ever seen essentially an upside down U that's made out of metal that you can attach 2 bikes to. That is 2 bike parking stalls, because you can get a bike on each side. It's gotta be undercover, so it's covered, but there is no locked, no nothing. And so I think, my recommendation, which would be the same as Jeff's, is that we come back to this, next year and look at, okay, and this is, I would say, quite antiquated at this point as far as our parking in general. In terms of, I think from a multifamily scenario, you're probably gonna want either a facility like in a room, or you're like in somebody's unit, or you're gonna want a facility that's like commonly shared, that you have a code to, that you can go, get to on the, inside the building on the ground floor, in a multifamily situation. And I think from that perspective, we've come so far. I don't think anymore that a bike rack in front of a building like we had, back in the 80s or 90s is adequate bike parking for any multifamily situation.
A side note here, one of the great things about the BART system in San Francisco, they've built these rooms that are secure. You have to have a code to get in. And they have bike parking in these rooms, but the other thing that they've got, and so it's secure because you gotta have a code, right? But the other thing that they've got is these stanchions in the room that have bicycle tools on tethers. So you don't even need to have your own tools. Everything you need to work on your bike is right there, and it's on these steel cable tethers. So that they're not, people aren't walking off with them or put it in their pocket and forget about it.
And keep in mind, this is just a minimum. A developer can always provide more,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
Okay, so thumbs up on pausing this and revisiting in 2026.
Makes no
Okay.
sense to spend time
Yeah.
on it if it's gonna
So-
go down and change.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
So-
I want to make the right decision.
Okay, so if we do that and we put the brakes on that, we know we're gonna come back to it. Next steps for this item would be coming back in December for public hearing. This would of course be after some revisions that account for what we've heard this evening here in our conversation. And then early January, make it to city council work session, and then hopefully by the end of January, adopt an ordinance. So that's kind of the rough estimation of the timeframe on this particular item. So if we're comfortable, let's just cruise on through here and start to take a look at our other housing updates for middle housing, accessory dwelling units, and then unit lot subdivisions. Any questions before I move right on with
So
this?
I do want to go around the table and find out if anybody has any further comment on the co-living element. Tanya or Elliot? Perfect, thank you.
I
All
still think it's a
right.
bad idea. But yes. I understand it's required, but we
Thanks for
should at
your
least put up
honesty,
some
Elliot. We appreciate
hindrances
it.
or ways for people to get along with, which would be full kitchenettes and a full bathroom.
Well, I always appreciate your comments, Elliot, because they're well thought out. And in this particular situation, we have to move forward.
Agreed.
Okay, so middle housing, I have been here with middle housing a couple of times. Jennifer, you're newer, Robert's a little bit newer, so I'm not sure how much of that you've had the benefit of learning about. So let's just do a high level kind of revisit of middle housing, what we're talking about there. So simply put, the state defines middle housing as buildings that are compatible in scale, form, and character with single-family houses and contain 2 or more attached, stacked, or clustered homes, including, and then it goes through all of the plexes, townhouses, stacked flats, courtyard apartments, and cottage housing. And then we know that per the House bill or the legislation on this item, one of the main provisions is that every jurisdiction, so including Lacey, we do have to formally adopt 6 of these 9 identified types of middle housing that the state has identified. So that needs to be formally specified or adopted within our code. One of the things that I just always like to really be clear about, because it does come up, and it has come up in this group and elsewhere, to be really clear that middle housing is not affordable housing, okay? These are not synonymous terms, and I know that it can feel just a little confusing at times, because we're talking about a product that in theory should be more affordable. But affordable housing is more defined by requirements that have to do with income thresholds, and the percentage of your income spent on housing, et cetera. So we just want to make sure that we distinguish that. So again, Elliot and Tanya, just everybody remembering not affordable housing, just middle housing. And then it helps fill the gap, right? So that's a concept here, is that it's really anything between single family housing and then larger apartment complexes. So the duplexes, all of the things that we've listed there, or that the state has listed. And then let's just refresh real quick about the statutory requirements. And this is from House Bill 1110 that supports the Middle Housing Initiative. So again, high level on these, doesn't get completely into the weeds. But main requirements are we must allow 2 middle housing units on all, thank you so much, Jeff. We must allow 2 middle housing units on all lots that support single family dwellings, okay? And then we must allow 3 or 4 units if one of those units is affordable at the 80% AMI or below. So in a nutshell, 2 by right, 3 or 4 if one of those is at the affordability rate. And then we talked about adopting 6 of the 9, same dimensional and permit standards as single family dwellings within whatever zone the middle housing is being developed. This is administrative design review only on middle housing. And then parking maximums, we can only require 1 off-street space per unit on lots that are 6,000 square feet or less. And we can only require 2 off-street spaces per unit on lots 6,000 square feet and above. We must allow unit lot subdivisions for ownership opportunities. I'll come back to that, because you're probably wondering, why am I talking about unit lot subdivisions with middle housing? We're going to touch upon that, but it is a tool that's kind of going to be wrapped into this suite of new housing options and provisions. And then critical areas and statutory exemptions do apply with middle housing. And then I wanted to touch upon refreshing your memory that back in 2024, we did run a survey, at least for a minimum of 30 days. I think it ran a bit longer than that. And we were looking for some very specific, I am really doing bad tonight with this. I'm really sorry. Thanks for all the reminders. So we did run a survey. We were looking very specifically for a couple of points of feedback from the community. We were really looking to see what types in your neighborhood, thinking of your neighborhood, what types of housing would you be the most comfortable with in your neighborhood if it were to be added? And you can sort of see here that what we ended up with our response was we started from a place of neutrality, and we were looking for, that degree of strongly approving or strongly disapproving. And so our target here is to go with something that's more, neutral, or in this case at least, because as you can see, disapproval ranked higher than anything on the approval scale. So with that said, we ended up with feedback telling us that 4plexes, okay, if we have to, townhouses if we have to, and cottage housing if we must. Now, the good news was we did have a pretty good response. We had 361 responses to that survey. With a lot, I don't remember the number, but there were, well over 100 open-ended comments. So we got a lot of feedback from this one. What you're seeing here, is that the planning commission, when we came to you, you really supported what the community told us. And so, what we heard from you was let's support that. So when we have to, adopt 6 of those 9, what we ended up here with was duplex, triplex, fourplex, skip the other plexes, stacked flats, townhomes, and cottage housing. What you're seeing in red there, those are the only 2 that we don't currently really have specified. So the city of Lacey's been ahead of this curve for a little while and already really allows duplexes, triplexes. We also have townhome provisions and cottage housing as well. So we've kind of been ahead. But what we're gonna do here is we're gonna back up just a little bit with that retrofitting kind of idea. And we're gonna say, these all now are gonna be considered middle housing, and that really that equates to density. Okay, so that was what I wanted to touch upon there. And then what has staff accomplished on the middle housing front? We did apply for and were rewarded a $75,000 grant from the Department of Commerce. This was for administrative support and for the work. And we successfully completed that process and passed the finish line on that at the closeout date of June of 2025 of this year. So that was great to see. As we've talked about earlier, we are continuing with very intentional cross-departmental collaboration on middle housing with all of the other housing initiatives. We've done a lot of public engagement the first year after we applied for and received the grant. We hit it pretty hard, and so we showed up at events and then did the survey and got a lot of great feedback that way. We've come to planning commission at least 2 times that I can think of. There may have been a third, although it may have been kind of related in a way with the comprehensive plan. So, and then staff is just continuing now to work on draft code to be able to present you as we did here this evening with co-living. So that is coming soon. So moving on, so this one is kind of important. So compliance date and preemption. So originally, how the law read, or how the RCW always or typically points out a due date for jurisdictions, they're not always super clear. Sometimes it, as in this case, due dates coincide or run with your comprehensive plan update cycle. So in this case, the City of Lacey's comprehensive plan update is due the end of this year, 2025. And we're almost there, and we know that. Originally, with middle housing and a couple other updates that we're gonna look at in a moment, the state was giving us 6 months beyond our comprehensive plan due date. So originally, we, along with many other jurisdictions, were really latching onto that 6 months. It was important because we're all neck deep in our comprehensive plan. Unfortunately, at the end of the 2025 legislative session, some sneaky things happened. And there was a little bit of language in there that took that away from us. So the due date shifted very quickly to all of this being due by the end of 2025, so December 31. We're not gonna meet that deadline. Now, the good news is there's no punitive, anything for not meeting that deadline. However, with middle housing specifically, there is a model ordinance that we do have to follow. So the state has developed a model ordinance. When we work with our current planners on this, we have sent them the model ordinance for their review and gotten their feedback, so they understand that this is what we would have to follow for middle housing proposals from January 1st of 2026 until such time that we adopt our own middle housing ordinance. So that's informational for you. So that does preempt us in this case with middle housing. So all the more reason to make sure that, we continue working toward the kind of middle housing code that we want to have within our own city. All right, so let's just move right along with that. So next steps for middle housing, we're just gonna continue doing what we're doing. We're gonna continue working on our draft language, behind the scenes collaboration that's really critical for this. And then we're gonna get you those code amendments the next time we schedule for middle housing, expect to see some kind of a draft in front of you. And then we'll revisit you guys in early 2026 with middle housing stuff. So that's coming. And then what about ADUs? Some more updates. Now we know that we have a great ADU program in Lacey, and we've even got some recognition about that. But the state gave us a new set of regulations for ADUs. So under House Bill 1337, we must now allow at least 2 ADUs per lot where single family detached homes are allowed. ADUs can be attached, detached, or even within an existing structure. There's no minimum lot size requirements for ADUs. These are all fairly familiar to you, I imagine. This one's new. Owner occupancy requirements are prohibited. So where it has been that an owner, to have an ADU on the lot with a single family home, the owner needed to be part of that equation. And that's no longer. So you can have an owner completely absent from the property, and so no requirements there.
But yeah, I'll just say in Lacey, we've never had an owner occupancy requirement.
Oh, thanks, Ryan.
Yeah,
Okay.
some jurisdictions have, and the state's coming
Okay.
out saying.
And we didn't.
you
All right.
can't do that.
Right.
Thanks for correcting me on that.
Does
Yeah.
that open anything up to squatter rights?
What do you mean?
So a squatter can put like their travel trailer on their property, on your property, and then put their mailing address, and you have to now evict them, you can't just kick them out.
No,
Okay.
so an accessory dwelling unit is like it's a permitted structure.
Right,
That's on your lot, that it could be stick built, it could be manufactured, but somebody has to pull a permit, which makes you think, well, then somebody has the authority to be able to do that. If somebody comes to your property, this doesn't affect anything like somebody coming in and being there illegally or trespassing. I
I'm
mean,
just
this.
pulling a permit and building on my property.
No,
Okay, I
no.
was just like, wait a minute.
Bad question.
It's a good question. It's a really good question. And this one will be new for you too. Currently, the Lacey code allows ADUs to be 850 square feet. That number is moving up to 1,000 square feet. That is given to us by the state. We do have policy options if we would like to go bigger than that. That is within our purview. I don't believe that's what staff would recommend right now, but you haven't seen any language before you, so I'm not gonna, put the cart before the horse on that one quite
Is
yet.
there a maximum for an ADU size?
The state code does not have language on a maximum.
Nope.
And this is, so the ratio, I think it was before 50% of the primary house, so
gone
that's
away.
gone.
Yep, good one.
So one
question.
thing to remember
Yeah.
with all of this,
Yep.
as you're
Six
having your
bedroom.
comments and questions, so. Where all of this is coming from, the co-living, the middle housing, the ADU stuff, so. The state legislature over time has passed a lot of legislation to encourage development of these types of units. But they've left, local control in place. And the legislature, because all they're hearing about is affordable housing and homelessness. And they're very, very frustrated with the speed at which local jurisdictions are adopting regulations. The housing affordability just becomes more and more of an issue. And so the state legislature, starting in 2022, just finally said, okay, we've had it. You guys, we've given you the tools, you're not implementing them. So now we are going to say, this is what you have to comply with. And, so that's where all of this is coming from. Most of this is not optional. So whether we agree with it or not, let's make the co-living, let's make the middle housing, let's make the ADU requirements look like Lacey. within the regulations we've been handed.
Thank you, Jeff. Very
Yeah.
well said.
I was curious within, because oh my gosh, why can't I think of the name? You know where you have the community, since the eighties, you have to have the H,
Homeowners Association.
that's the one.
Yeah.
So where these have been excluded previously, does this supersede homeowners associations?
So actually, that's a really great question, and the answer is, no changes they won't have to retrofit. I keep coming back to your word. I'm really liking your word tonight, Robert. So existing homeowner associations, not touched. Any new development proposals, though, must allow for this.
Yeah, they won't allow restrictions within covenants that they used to allow.
Correct.
But any new ones that come on after this legislation was passed will have to comply with the
After
new
the
legislation.
yeah.
So.
Right.
anything
Yep.
that's-
And who knows what they'll do in the future.
So there is a lot of,
Legislation.
within covenants, there is a lot of language that precludes you from being able to do many of these different things, right?
Absolutely.
And so those things still apply, while they're not city code, they still are subject to, HOA approvals.
Right.
And so if you're trying to build something, then you can't get the approval of your HOA to do it, it's gonna kibosh it before you even get to the
Mhm.
city to get a
Right.
permit.
Well, and I think that's a really good point, so just wanna comment really quickly along those lines that with middle housing, with pretty much all of these. Again, just because our code may say it's possible, it may not be possible at all, right? And so development standards are still going to have to be met. So you can theorize all day about, oh my gosh, we might have, 6 people in our neighbor's backyard or 6 new buildings in our neighbor's backyard, but the reality is really, there's not that many lots in Lacey that can probably accommodate this kind of density. In fact, we did a poll, we did some research on that as well, and we targeted, I think about 10,000 parcels in all of the city limits of Lacey, where they were 10,000 square feet and larger, and they were within 200 feet of a sewer connection. And those would be the parcels most likely, probably, to see this kind of density. So anyway, and then the last 2 on this were, the last 3, parking maximums, that looks very familiar. We just saw that with middle housing, so the same standards there. Roof height limitations, must be greater than or equal to 24 feet for ADUs. So we can't, create a lesser, roof height than 24 feet on the ADUs. And then this is new as well. They may be sold independent of the primary dwelling unit. So where traditionally these ADU units have been complementary to the single family dwelling and kind of a one package deal. Now there's gonna be options to independently sell the ADU, even if it was originally established anyway, I can feel myself messing that up, so I'm gonna just pause on that. Just know that right now, the new law will allow these to be sold independently. Okay, so let's just move on to the unit lot subdivision. This is one where this may be a new term for you. And so a unit lot subdivision, what is it? Well, it creates new lots, much like a typical subdivision, except for in a unit lot subdivision, it allows flexible application of dimensional standards. So in a ULS for short, the development as a whole, we're gonna consider that the parent lot. So that would conform to all of the zoning dimensional standards, but the individual lots within a unit lot subdivision are not required to meet those development standards. So that's kind of the caveat here. The development as a whole, the parcel of land as a whole, still has to meet those standards, whatever those are. But after the unit lot subdivision is applied, each of those units does not have to meet those standards. So unit lots, we could call them child lots. So we've got the parent lot, we've got the child lot. They're individual, they're sellable, they're going to be legal lots of record, and they'll have their own tax parcel identification number with the county as well. They must be included. This is also something we don't have a choice about. This must become a new pathway within our short plat regulations. Okay, so that's where these are going to be authored, is in that short plat regulation for our city. Ryan, am I correct that our city does a maximum of 9
That's right.
within the short plat?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. And these two will be an administrative approval. So that's really important too, because that really suggests and emphasizes the timelines of things, right? So this is a way to sort of streamline this process of dividing these units. So administrative approval. So I think that's probably all I can say about it at this moment. But let's take a look at just some examples. So down at the bottom here, if you can see that, so you've got your little key down there. So the unit lot line, of course, is your orange dash line. So that's fairly self-explanatory. You can see the parcel here is all the same, and they've just applied some different configurations, whether it's middle housing, such as in the third example, you've got 4 townhouse units. The first example, you've got your single family home that's added a triplex in the back. And you can see with those orange lines there, how they're applying that unit lot subdivision. So you will end up with some common shared spaces, similar to perhaps maybe a condominium model of ownership. But you're also going to own the land that is directly underneath your unit, which is not what you see in a condominium form of ownership. So these are just, again, just a couple of examples on how this might be applied and why it might be applied. In the last example there, you can see the what I was talking about, where an ADU can also be part of that unit lot subdivision. And every single one of those can be sold. So definitely, if we look at, we talk a lot about who are the potential residents of these units. We don't talk a whole lot about the owner. This definitely does provide, or is, puts out some more options for some possible revenue options for property owners. So, I just want to be mindful to remember they are also part of the equation when we make our decisions as a city. So let's just move right along. I'm almost done. You guys have been so patient. I won't go into huge detail here, but if you want more information, I'm happy to send anything your way I've got all kinds of resources. But because we were talking about the unit lot subdivision and kind of comparing it to a condominium, this is kind of a nice chart. Commerce produced this. It just gives us kind of those high points. What are the differences between the two? And so one of the things that I started there, and we talked about that, is the processing time. So this is processed, a unit lot subdivision would be processed through the jurisdiction with administrative review. That eliminates the state process that is required for a condominium model. So there's a lot of time and paperwork savings there, probably some costs involved with that as well. And then, so anyway, I won't go through this, but if you want to spend more time with this, feel free anytime to reach out. I'm happy to send you any resources to take a little bit of a deeper dive into this process. And boy, we're getting close. We are cooking right along here. So what's next for ADUs and unit lot subdivisions for time frame? Well, same as with middle housing, staff's continuing to work on draft language. So these are part of those collaborative meetings that we're having that are touching upon everything that we need to implement. And then we'll revisit Planning Commission in early spring as well with these. What we would like to do is we'd like to come to you with each item so that we have some time really talking about each item. But we'd like to overall propose that all of our housing initiatives, not the co-living, the middle housing, unit lot subdivisions, and the ADU provisions, that we really package those as a suite of housing initiatives, so that we would be doing one ordinance process rather than multiple ordinance processes. So that is our proposal to do that. But again, we won't overwhelm you. We will make sure that each of these items gets proper attention, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so just to key in on that, so what we'll do is we'll come to you first thing after the first of the year with middle housing, and then followed probably by ADUs, and then followed there by lot subdivisions, so that'll probably be, think about maybe a month or so for each one, package those all up, do one public hearing, and then move those to council as a package.
I think that makes sense.
And this last one, it might, I feel like Jeff already really touched upon a lot of this, but I just assume the question might come up, why would we want to address these all together? And just, a couple of reasons there are, they all expand housing options, and specifically on lots where single family homes are already allowed. So that's kind of the target with a lot of these infill housing initiatives. They all increase housing choice, they aim to reduce barriers, they aim to promote more affordability or at least reach broader income bands. They all modify the same sort of areas within our Lacey Municipal Code, so it's nice to address them all at one time. Coordinated update provides clarity and consistency, and then it's efficient too. So, we also want to be mindful of how we're working through our processes and be efficient where we can be. And I think that is all I have for you, other than, happy holidays. If you celebrate the holidays, I can't believe that we're here already, and here we are. So that is all I had. I most appreciate your time. This was a lot to get through this evening.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, and I don't know, does anybody have any questions for Jennifer? There really isn't enough specifics in this presentation. Like Jennifer said, we're gonna go through each of these one by one, where there will be a lot more detail and a lot more room for input from this commission. So what I would like to say to everybody, thank you very much. We went through a lot tonight. This was a pretty meaty meeting. And there was a lot here. I appreciate all of your comments. I appreciate your dedication to the people of Lacey. I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. And I hope you and yours remain healthy. And with that, we will see you in about 4 weeks.
Thank you.
Adjourned.
Bye, everybody.
Shoot.
Bye.
Have a great time.